CHAPTER12 URBIETORBI. The astronomical, mechanical, and topographical difficulties resolved, finally came the question of finance. The sum required was far too great for any individual, or even any single state, to provide the requisite millions. President Barbicane undertook, despite of the matter being a purely American affair, to render it one of universal interest, and to request the financial cooperation of all peoples. It was he maintained the right and duty of the whole earth to interfere in the affairs of its satellite. The subscription opened at Baltimore extended properly to the whole world orbi et orbi. This subscription was successful beyond all expectation, notwithstanding that it was a question not of lending, but of giving the money. It was a purely disinterested operation in the strictest sense of the term, and offered not the slightest chance of profit. The effect, however, of Barbicane's communication was not confined to the frontiers of the United States. It crossed the Atlantic and Pacific, invading simultaneously Asia and Europe, Africa and Oceanica. The observatories of the Union placed themselves in immediate communication with those of foreign countries, some, such as those of Paris, Petersburg, Berlin, Stockholm, Hamburg, Malta, Lisbon, Benares, Madras, and others, transmitted their good wishes. The rest maintained a prudent silence, quietly awaiting the result. As for the observatory at Greenwich, seconded as it was by the 22 astronomical establishments of Great Britain, it spoke plainly enough. It boldly denied the possibility of success, and pronounced in favor of the theories of Captain Nicholl, but this was nothing more than mere English jealousy. On the 8th of October, President Barbicane published a manifesto full of enthusiasm, in which he made an appeal to all persons of goodwill upon the face of the earth. This document, translated into all languages, met with immense success. Subscription lists were opened in all the principal cities of the Union, with a central office at the Baltimore Bank, 9 Baltimore Street. In addition, subscriptions were received at the following banks in the different states of the 2 continents: at Vienna with S.M.D. Rothschild, at Petersburg Stieglitz & Co., at Paris the Credit Mobilier, at Stockholm Tati and Arfridsson, at London N.M. Rothschild & Son, at Turin Ardain & Co., at Berlin Mendelssohn, at Geneva Lombard Odier & Co., at Constantinople the Ottoman Bank, at Brussels J. Lambert, at Madrid Daniel Weisweller, at Amsterdam Netherlands Credit Co., at Rome Torlonia & Co., at Lisbon Listen, at Copenhagen Private Bank, at Rio de Janeiro Private Bank, at Montevideo Private Bank, at Valparaiso and Lima Thomas Law Chamber & Co., at Mexico Martin Daran & Co. 3 days after the manifesto of President Barbicane, $4 million were paid into the different towns of the Union. With such a balance, the gun club might begin operations at once, but some days later advices were received to the effect that foreign subscriptions were being eagerly taken up. Certain countries distinguished themselves by their liberality. Others untied their purse strings with less facility. A matter of temperament. Figures are, however, more eloquent than words, and here is the official statement of the sums which were paid into the credit of the Gun Club at the close of the subscription. Russia paid in as her contingent the enormous sum of 368,733 rubles. No one need be surprised at this. who bears in mind the scientific taste of the Russians and the impetus which they have given to astronomical studies thanks to their numerous observatories. France began by deriding the pretensions of the Americans. The moon served as a pretext for 1,000 stale puns and a score of ballads, in which bad taste contested the palm with ignorance, but as formerly the French paid before singing, so now they paid after having had their laugh, and they subscribed for a sum of 1,253,930 francs. At that price they had a right to enjoy themselves a little. Austria showed herself generous. In the midst of her financial crisis, her public contributions amounted to the sum of 216,000 florins, a perfect godsend. 52,000 riksdaler were the remittance of Sweden and Norway. The amount is large for the country, but it would undoubtedly have been considerably increased had the subscription been opened in Christiania simultaneously with that at Stockholm. For some reason or other, the Norwegians do not like to send their money to Sweden. Prussia, by a remittance of 250,000 thalers, testified her high approval of the enterprise. Turkey behaved generously, but she had a personal interest in the matter. The moon, in fact, regulates the cycle of her years and her fast of Ramadan. She could not do less than give 1,372,640 piastres, and she gave them with an eagerness which denoted, however, some pressure on the part of the government. Belgium distinguished herself among the second-rate states by a grant of 513,000 francs, about 2 centimes per head of her population. Holland and her colonies interested themselves to the extent of 110,000 florins, only demanding an allowance of 5% discount for paying ready money. Denmark, a little contracted in territory, gave nevertheless 9,000 ducats, proving her love for scientific experiments. The Germanic Confederation pledged itself to 34,285 florins. It was impossible to ask for more. Besides, they would not have given it. Though very much crippled, Italy found 200,000 lira in the pockets of her people. If she had had Venetia, she would have done better. But she had not. The states of the Church thought that they could not send less than 7,040 Roman crowns, and Portugal carried her devotion to science as far as 30,000 cruzados. It was the widow's mighty 6 piastres. But self-constituted empires are always rather short of money. 257 francs. This was the modest contribution of Switzerland to the American work. One must freely admit that she did not see the practical side of the matter. It did not seem to her that the mere dispatch of a shot to the moon could possibly establish any relation of affairs with her, and it did not seem prudent to her to embark her capital in so hazardous an enterprise. After all, perhaps she was right. As to Spain, she could not scrape together more than 110 reals. She gave as an excuse that she had her railways to finish. The truth is that science is not favorably regarded in that country. It is still in a backward state. And moreover, certain Spaniards, not by any means the least educated, did not form a correct estimate of the bulk of the projectile, compared with that of the moon. They feared that it would disturb the established order of things. In that case it were better to keep aloof, which they did to the tune of some reals. There remained but England, and we know the contemptuous antipathy with which she received Barbicane's proposition. The English have but one soul for the whole 26 millions of inhabitants which Great Britain contains. they hinted that the enterprise of the gun club was contrary to the principle of non-intervention, and they did not subscribe a single farthing. At this intimation, the gun club merely shrugged its shoulders and returned to its great work when South America, that is to say, Peru, Chile, Brazil, the provinces of La Plata and Colombia, had poured forth their quota into their hands, the sum of $300,000, it found itself in possession of a considerable capital, of which the following is a statement. United States subscriptions $4 million, foreign subscriptions $1,446,675, total $5,446,675. Such was the sum which the public poured into the treasury of the gun club. Let no one be surprised at the vastness of the amount, the work of casting, boring, masonry, the transport of workmen, their establishment in an almost uninhabited country, the construction of furnaces and workshops, the plant, the powder, the projectile and incipient expenses would, according to the estimates, absorb nearly the whole. Certain cannon shots in the Federal War cost $1,000 apiece. This one of President Barbicane, unique in the annals of gunnery, might well cost 5,000 times more. On the 20th of October, a contract was entered into with the manufactory at Cold Spring, near New York, which during the war had furnished the largest Parrott cast iron guns. It was stipulated between the contracting parties that the manufactory of Cold Spring should engage to transport to Tampa town in southern Florida the necessary materials for casting the Columbiad. The work was bound to be completed at latest by the 15th of October following, and the cannon delivered in good condition, under penalty of a forfeit of $100 a day to the moment when the moon should again present herself under the same conditions, that is to say, in 18 years and 11 days. The engagement of the workmen, their pay, and all the necessary details of the work devolved upon the Cold Spring Company. This contract, executed in duplicate, was signed by Barbicane, president of the Gun Club, of the one part, and T. Murchison, director of the Cold Spring Manufactory, of the other, who thus executed the deed on behalf of their respective principals. Chapter 13. Stones Hill. When the decision was arrived at by the Gun Club, to the disparagement of Texas, every one in America, where reading is a universal acquirement, set to work to study the geography of Florida. Never before had there been such a sale for works like Bertram's Travels in Florida, Roman's Natural History of East and West Florida, William's Territory of Florida, and Cleland on the cultivation of the sugar cane in Florida. It became necessary to issue fresh editions of these works. Barbicane had something better to do than to read. He desired to see things with his own eyes, and to mark the exact position of the proposed gun. So, without a moment's loss of time, he placed at the disposal of the Cambridge Observatory the funds necessary for the construction of a telescope, and entered into negotiations with the House of Breadwill and Co. of Albany for the construction of an aluminum projectile of the required size. He then quitted Baltimore, accompanied by J.T. Maston, Major Elphinstone, and the manager of the Cold Spring factory. On the following day, the four fellow travelers arrived at New Orleans. There they immediately embarked on board the Tampico, a dispatch boat belonging to the Federal Navy, which the government had placed at their disposal, and, getting up steam, the banks of Louisiana speedily disappeared from sight. The passage was not long. 2 days after starting, the Tampico, having made 480 miles, came in sight of the coast of Florida. On a nearer approach, Barbicane found himself in view of a low, flat country of somewhat barren aspect. After coasting along a series of creeks abounding in lobsters and oysters, the Tampico entered the Bay of Espiritu Santo, where she finally anchored in a small natural harbor, formed by the embouchure of the river Hillsborough, at 7 p.m. on the 22nd of October. Our 4 passengers disembarked at once. "Gentlemen," said Barbicane, "we have no time to lose. Tomorrow we must obtain horses, and proceed to reconnoiter the country." Barbicane had scarcely set his foot on shore, when 3,000 of the inhabitants of Tampa Town came forth to meet him, an honor due to the President, who had signalized their country by his choice. Declining, however, every kind of ovation, Barbicane ensconced himself in a room of the Franklin Hotel. On the morrow some of the small horses of the Spanish breed, full of vigor and of fire, stood snorting under his windows. But instead of 4 steeds, here were 50, together with their riders. Barbicane descended with his 3 fellow travelers, and much astonished were they all to find themselves in the midst of such a cavalcade. He remarked that every horseman carried a carbine, slung across his shoulders, and pistols in his holsters. On expressing his surprise at these preparations, he was speedily enlightened by a young Floridan, who quietly said, "Sir, there are Seminoles there." "What do you mean by Seminoles?" "Savages who scour the prairies. We thought it best, therefore, to escort you on your road." "Who?" cried J.T. Maston, mounting his steed. "All right," said the Floridan, "but it is true enough, nevertheless." "Gentlemen," answered Barbicane, "I thank you for your kind attention, but it is time to be off." It was 5 a.m. when Barbicane and his party, quitting Tampa Town, made their way along the coast in the direction of Alifaya Creek. This little river falls into Hillsborough Bay 12 miles above Tampa Town. Barbicane and his escort coasted along its right bank to the eastward. Soon the waves of the bay disappeared behind a bend of rising ground, and the Floridan champaign alone offered itself to view. Florida, discovered on Palm Sunday, in 1512, by Juan Ponce de Leon, was originally named Pasha, Florida. It little deserved that designation, with its dry and parched coasts, but after some few miles of track the nature of the soil gradually changes, and the country shows itself worthy of the name. Cultivated plains soon appear, where are united all the productions of the northern and tropical floras, terminating in prairies abounding with pineapples and yams, tobacco, rice, cotton plants, and sugar canes, which extend beyond reach of sight, flinging their riches broadcast with careless prodigality. Barbicane appeared highly pleased on observing the progressive elevation of the land, and in answer to a question of J.T. Maston replied, "My worthy friend, we cannot do better than sink our Columbiad in these high grounds. To get nearer the moon, perhaps," said the secretary of the gun club. "Not exactly," replied Barbicane, smiling. "Do you not see that, among these elevated plateaus, we shall have a much easier work of it? No struggles with the water springs, which will save us long expensive tubings, and we shall be working in daylight instead of down a deep and narrow well. Our business, then, is to open our trenches upon ground some hundreds of yards above the level of the sea." "You are right, sir," struck in Murchison, the engineer, "and, if I mistake not, we shall ere long find a suitable spot for our purpose. I wish we were at the first stroke of the pickaxe, said the president. And I wish we were at the last, cried J.T. Maston. About 10 a.m., the little band had crossed a dozen miles. To fertile plains succeeded a region of forests. Their perfumes of the most varied kinds mingled together in tropical profusion. These almost impenetrable forests were composed of pomegranates, orange trees, citrons, figs, olives, apricots, bananas, huge vines, whose blossoms and fruits rivaled each other in color and perfume. Beneath the odorous shade of these magnificent trees fluttered and warbled a little world of brilliantly plumaged birds. J.T. Maston and the Major could not repress their admiration on finding themselves in the presence of the glorious beauties of this wealth of nature. President Barbicane, however, less sensitive to these wonders, was in haste to press forward. The very luxuriance of the country was displeasing to him. They hastened onward, therefore, and were compelled to ford several rivers, not without danger, for they were infested with huge alligators from 15 to 18 feet long. Maston courageously menaced them with his steel hook, but he only succeeded in frightening some pelicans and teal, while tall flamingos stared stupidly at the party. At length these denizens of the swamps disappeared in their turn. Smaller trees became thinly scattered among less dense thickets. A few isolated groups, detached in the midst of endless plains, over which ranged herds of startled deer. At last, cried Barbicane, rising in his stirrups, here we are at the region of pines. Yes, and of savages too, replied the Major. In fact, some Seminoles had just came in sight upon the horizon. They rode violently backward and forward on their fleet horses, brandishing their spears or discharging their guns with a dull report. These hostile demonstrations, however, had no effect upon Barbicane and his companions. They were then occupying the center of a rocky plain, which the sun scorched with its parching rays. This was formed by a considerable elevation of the soil, which seemed to offer to the members of the gun club all the conditions requisite for the construction of their Columbiad. Halt, said Barbicane, reining up. Has this place any local appellation? It is called Stone's Hill, replied one of the Floridans. Barbicane, without saying a word, dismounted, seized his instruments, and began to note his position with extreme exactness. The little band, drawn up in the rear, watched his proceedings in profound silence. At this moment the sun passed the meridian. Barbicane, after a few moments, rapidly wrote down the result of his observations and said, "This spot is situated 1,800 feet above the level of the sea, into 77 lot, and 57 w, long of the meridian of Washington. It appears to me by its rocky and barren character to offer all the conditions requisite for our experiment. On that plain will be raised our magazines, workshops, furnaces, and workmen's huts. And here, from this very spot," said he, stamping his foot on the summit of Stone's Hill, "hence shall our projectile take its flight into the regions of the solar world." Chapter 14. Pickaxe and Trawl. The same evening Barbicane and his companions returned to Tampa town, and Murchison, the engineer, re-embarked on board the Tampico for New Orleans. His object was to enlist an army of workmen and to collect together the greater part of the materials. The members of the gun club remained at Tampa town for the purpose of setting on foot the preliminary works by the aid of the people of the country. 8 days after its departure, the Tampico returned into the Bay of Espiritu Santo with a whole flotilla of steamboats. Murchison had succeeded in assembling together 1,500 artisans, attracted by the high pay and considerable bounties offered by the gun club. He had enlisted a choice legion of stokers, iron founders, lime burners, miners, brickmakers, and artisans of every trade, without distinction of color. As many of these people brought their families with them, their departure resembled a perfect emigration. On the 31st of October, at 10 o'clock in the morning, the troop disembarked on the quays of Tampa town. And one may imagine the activity which pervaded that little town, whose population was thus doubled in a single day. During the first few days, they were busy discharging the cargo brought by the flotilla, the machines, and the rations, as well as a large number of huts constructed of iron plates, separately pieced and numbered. At the same period, Barbicane laid the first sleepers of a railway 15 miles in length, intended to unite Stones Hill with Tampa town. On the 1st of November, Barbicane quitted Tampa town with a detachment of workmen, and on the following day, the whole town of huts was erected round Stones Hill. This they enclosed with palisades, and in respect of energy and activity, it might have been mistaken for one of the great cities of the Union. Everything was placed under a complete system of discipline, and the works were commenced in most perfect order. The nature of the soil having been carefully examined, by means of repeated borings, the work of excavation was fixed for the 4th of November. On that day, Barbicane called together his foremen, and addressed them as follows: "You are well aware, my friends, of the object with which I have assembled you together in this wild part of Florida. Our business is to construct a cannon measuring 9 feet in its interior diameter, 6 feet thick, and with a stone revetment of 19.5 feet in thickness. We have therefore a well of 60 feet in diameter to dig down to a depth of 900 feet. This great work must be completed within 8 months, so that you have 2,543,400 cubic feet of earth to excavate in 255 days. That is to say, in round numbers, 2,000 cubic feet per day. That which would present no difficulty to 1,000 navvies working in open country, will be of course more troublesome in a comparatively confined space. However, the thing must be done, and I reckon for its accomplishment upon your courage as much as upon your skill." At 8 o'clock the next morning, the first stroke of the pickaxe was struck upon the soil of Florida. And from that moment, that prince of tools was never inactive for one moment. In the hands of the excavators, the gangs relieved each other every 3 hours. On the 4th of November, 50 workmen commenced digging, in the very center of the enclosed space, on the summit of Stones Hill, a circular hole 60 feet in diameter. The pickaxe first struck upon a kind of black earth, 6 inches in thickness, which was speedily disposed of. To this earth succeeded 2 feet of fine sand, which was carefully laid aside, as being valuable for serving the casting of the inner mold. After the sand appeared some compact white clay, resembling the chalk of Great Britain, which extended down to a depth of 4 feet. Then the iron of the picks struck upon the hard bed of the soil, a kind of rock formed of petrified shells, very dry, very solid, and which the picks could with difficulty penetrate. At this point the excavation exhibited a depth of 6.5 feet, and the work of the masonry was begun. At the bottom of the excavation, they constructed a wheel of oak, a kind of sickle strongly bolted together, and of immense strength. The center of this wooden disc was hollowed out to a diameter equal to the exterior diameter of the columbiad. Upon this wheel rested the first layers of the masonry, the stones of which were bound together by hydraulic cement with irresistible tenacity. The workmen, after laying the stones from the circumference to the center, were thus enclosed within a kind of well 21 feet in diameter. When this work was accomplished, the miners resumed their picks and cut away the rock from underneath the wheel itself, taking care to support it as they advanced upon blocks of great thickness at every 2 feet, which the whole gained in depth. They successively withdrew the blocks. The wheel then sank little by little, and with it the massive ring of masonry, on the upper bed of which the masons labored incessantly, always reserving some vent holes to permit the escape of gas during the operation of the casting. This kind of work required on the part of the workmen extreme nicety and minute attention. More than one, in digging underneath the wheel, was dangerously injured by the splinters of stone, but their ardor never relaxed, night or day. By day they worked under the rays of the scorching sun. By night, under the gleam of the electric light, the sounds of the picks against the rock, the bursting of mines, the grinding of the machines, the wreaths of smoke scattered through the air, traced around Stone's Hill a sickle of terror, which the herds of buffaloes and the war parties of the Seminoles never ventured to pass. Nevertheless, the works advanced regularly. As the steam cranes actively removed the rubbish of unexpected obstacles, there was little account. And with regard to foreseen difficulties, they were speedily disposed of. At the expiration of the first month, the well had attained the depth assigned for that lapse of time, namely 112 feet. This depth was doubled in December and trebled in January. During the month of February, the workmen had to contend with a sheet of water, which made its way right across the outer soil. It became necessary to employ very powerful pumps and compressed air engines to drain it off, so as to close up the orifice from whence it issued. Just as one stops a leak on board ship, they at last succeeded in getting the upper hand of these untoward streams. Only, in consequence of the loosening of the soil, the wheel partly gave way, and a slight partial settlement ensued. This accident cost the life of several workmen. No fresh occurrence thenceforward arrested the progress of the operation, and on the 10th of June, 20 days before the expiration of the period fixed by Barbicane, the well, lined throughout with its facing of stone, had attained the depth of 900 feet. At the bottom the masonry rested upon a massive block measuring 30 feet in thickness, while on the upper portion, it was level with the surrounding soil. President Barbicane and the members of the gun club warmly congratulated their engineer, Murchison. The cyclopean work had been accomplished with extraordinary rapidity. During these 8 months Barbicane never quitted Stone's Hill for a single instant. Keeping ever close by the work of excavation, he busied himself incessantly with the welfare and health of his workpeople, and was singularly fortunate in warding off the epidemics common to large communities of men, and so disastrous in those regions of the globe which are exposed to the influences of tropical climates. Many workmen, it is true, paid with their lives for the rashness inherent in these dangerous labors, but these mishaps are impossible to be avoided, and they are classed among the details with which the Americans trouble themselves but little. They have in fact more regard for human nature in general than for the individual in particular. Nevertheless, Barbicane professed opposite principles to these and put them in force at every opportunity. So thanks to his care, his intelligence, his useful intervention in all difficulties, his prodigious and humane sagacity, the average of accidents did not exceed that of transatlantic countries noted for their excessive precautions. France, for instance, among others, where they reckon about one accident for every 200,000 francs of work.